Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Art Talk. So I guess we'll just start off with like the first question, which is just introductions. So your name, your title, where you work, what you do, where you're based, and just like anything else that you think is important about yourself that you'd like us to know.
Okay, well, I'm one of 11, and I'm very tempted to hijack the process because it just seems so lazy to get all the questions in advance and have students who are brilliant not even get to ask questions, but just sit there passively, maybe playing games on their phone or texting each other and other people. But I'm gonna try to be cooperative.
We usually have time for questions throughout if people want to ask them. So,
Okay. Well, then know that my preference is that, and this is to students, that it not feel like a lecture, it not feel like a kind of dull talking head situation. I would rather have an exchange, so as things pop up that you want to, put on the table, we can dispense with the list of 12 questions that are already loaded, so you don't have to do anything and still look brilliant. And then it'll feel more organic and natural. And then if that's the reward for me. I mean, that'll be your payment to me, because I could be feeding my kid right now too. But so introductions. The thing about introductions is that when people introduce me, they always tell students things they're not really interested in. And that's when I typically hijack the situation and ask the people who are kidnapped here for 1 hour, what is it you want to know about me before the kidnapping officially begins? So I'm going to flip it. So I'm going to ask everybody who has a student title today, ask me one question. It could be anything. And hopefully it's in the direction of, what would you like to know? What are you most interested in at this moment? Because I could read a bio that's about 10 minutes long, and it would probably bore you to tears. And it probably wouldn't answer any of the things you're interested in. So try me. I can call on you because I can pull up your names, or you can volunteer yourselves. Right, Joy?
I'll go. So I would like to know where you find your creative inspiration, and I'm sure, as most other artists do, like you're bound to come up with creative blocks and obstacles to like getting work out. So what do you do to combat that?
Wow, great questions. At least two of those questions I heard in that comment about process and about defeating creative blocks, or in creative writing, we call them writer's blocks. I'm gonna start with the second part first. I don't think there's any such thing as writer's block. I think it's an excuse to not push the buttons that are preloaded and acknowledge everything that's happening. And it also, I think it cheats the process, to answer the first question, because I don't think, if we're talking about writing, I don't think writing begins at the moment you put the pen on the paper or the finger on the keyboard. I think it starts way before that. And in my case, I think it includes not just what's on your mind, but what you might even dream about. I mean, many of you have dreamt and woken up and maybe wrote down what you're dreaming about, and maybe it turned into a piece of art or a letter or an idea. But I think that thinking about what you're going to write or create is part of the process itself. So to me, there's no such thing as writer's block. As long as you are alive, you can be involved in the process at some point. And some of that involvement may mean just listening. I think that's the most important skill for an artist, is to listen and pay attention. I mean, listen with your whole body, not just your ears, but what is it that you feel, that moves you, that pushes you, that feels like intuition, or makes your hair on the back of your neck stand up, or makes you uncomfortable. All those things are a kind of listening. And if you are an artist paying attention in the world, there's always something that's out of balance. And if you're using your empathy, it doesn't take a lot to step into that space, be uncomfortable or moved in any direction, and then make a decision to respond to it in a creative way. I really believe that. And I think that if you understand that and trust it enough, you can even cheat the process. You know, I can tell you an example of something I did because I understood how subconscious works. And the thing about your subconscious is that you can't turn it off, even when you're sleeping, because it's below your consciousness. Sometimes you're not even aware of what it's doing or what it's thinking. But if you ask yourself a question and then somebody changes the subject, but you already started thinking about the answer to that question, your subconscious will continue to work on it, even if you go to sleep. And because I understand how that works, when I was writing a book called Buffalo Dance, you know, set in the 1800s, you know, about a time period I didn't know a lot about, but I'd done a lot of research, including traveling to the physical space. But I would ask myself a question at night before I fell asleep. Usually a question that I didn't know the answer to. When I wake up the next morning, I would go right to my journal and try to write down the stuff that felt like an epiphany. I mean, it felt like this gift came from nowhere and I didn't see it coming. It just kind of snapped in my head, and it didn't. The thing that snapped was me waking up, and it was already there waiting for me. So I used that process to write an entire book of poetry about the Lewis and Clark expedition, because there was so much that was unknown. And I trust the research I had done, and I trusted that process, and it was very effective for me. So because of that experience, it's easy for me to believe that as long as you're alive and you're an artist, you're involved in a process. Even if you're just studying or listening to how people talk, or paying attention to where shadows fall across a face, or where the music is when you hear a horse race at the finish. You know, if you can hear music in that pacing and that finish, and the crowd coming in as part of the crescendo, if you can hear music in that space, and if that's your thing, if that's your creative language that you use, you know, whatever it is, if you tune into that and you're listening, you're always an artist. You may not always be making art in that moment, but you may be preparing yourself to make the next piece of art. My challenge is that I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and the hardest thing I have to do is decide what this thing is supposed to be. Is it a play? Is it a piece of visual art? Is it a poem? Is it a piece of fiction? And how do I want people to respond? You know, the additional challenge for me is I also consider myself an activist, you know, so that I want my work to be utilitarian. I'm not trying to make something pretty to hang on a wall. I want people to stand in front of my visual art and try to figure something out, to feel challenged, to be moved either direction, you know, to understand that this thing is trying to speak to you, that to speak back, you have to consider it. But I know there are people who make pretty things for people to enjoy because they're pretty and then move on. I just think that those pretty things are easily replaced and forgotten. Those things that make you uncomfortable, that shake you to your roots, that leave you with a question, you take that with you. You know, you carry that around in your pocket, you know, in your soul, if it's a deep enough question, for a long time. And then it becomes part of you. You know, I think that's the difference between me and those artists who just want to make something pretty to sell. I'm just not that guy. So I didn't answer those two questions directly, but I came at it tangentially. I hope that works for you. Thank you. Isn't this better than the traditional questions? Thank you. Somebody else. And if we stall out, Elizabeth will jump in with one of those prepared questions. She's got your back. But I'm not going to bite.
I've got one. So you were talking about how you want to challenge people with your art and make them think and make them, something that can move them and affect them throughout the rest of the day, or maybe throughout the rest of their life. What themes do you often see in your own work? Like, what do you want to tell other people?
Oh, thank you, Patricia. That's a great question. Two parts. The thematic part of it is pretty easy. I think that even though I've written 11 books, and I probably have work in about 80 anthologies and journals, 80 or more. I'm just guessing by the amount of space it takes up on the shelf. I've never really counted. You could synthesize those poems into about 4 or 5 categories. All of them either deal with family, identity, place, history, or social justice. All of them will land in one of those categories. Sometimes a poem may deal with more than one of those categories. But that, I've claimed that space, those 5 topical areas as mine. That's my niche. And all the other things that are about pretty and powerful and large or quirky, that's somebody else's area. Those 5 things are the things I'm most comfortable trying to get right. I think it's in the same way that Japanese haiku artists spend their entire career trying to write the perfect haiku, but never achieving it, but just trying to approach that perfection. And they feel like it's the same poem over and over again. They're just trying to find real subtle ways to perfect it. I think that for me, it doesn't feel like the same poem, but because it's the same kind of things, that's enough for me. I mean, I don't think I could write any broader than that. In my head or somewhere in a journal, there's at least 25 more books I want to write, and I just hope to be able to, and even more that I want to read. But we only get, who knows, depending on what you believe. I don't know how much. At 59 years old, I feel like I lived more than half my life already. None of the men in my family have lived more than 81 years. So it's, if I'm the average man in my family, I don't have a lot of time left. So I'm trying to make the most of it. And part of why I teach, even though that wasn't a question, is so there's something about being with young people and teaching in the classroom that is the equivalent of the fountain of youth. The ideas, the energy, the enthusiasm that I see, that I experience really makes me feel, not young, but energized in a way that it feels alive. It doesn't feel dull and quiet and over. There's something about becoming a freshman. Like you come out of elementary school and in the 6th grade, you're the top of the food chain, but then you go to middle school and you're the bottom again. Then after middle school, you go to high school and you're the bottom of the food chain. Then you become a senior and you're a big man or a big woman on campus. Then you go to college and you're on the bottom again. You may spend 2 or 3 years and decide to pledge a fraternity or sorority, and then you come on the bottom again. Or you take a job after graduation at an entry level and have to work your way up to the top. So it's a cycle of having to reinvent yourself, go from the bottom to the top. It just seems built into this kind of Western idea of how to move in the world. But that renewal, I mean, our spring is the same kind of thing. You know, it's really, I want to believe that winter is over, but I'm afraid to because I live in Kentucky. I know better than to trust. You know, yesterday it was 59 degrees, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to put my sweaters in a box. And I saw on the calendar it's going to be 260-degree days next week, and I'm already thinking about, you know, a long bike ride. But I know that, you know, at the end of this year, winter will be here, and I have to start all over again. So that there's, you know, seeing those themes and you know, feeling like I'm part of something larger, you know, connected to nature, or alive in the natural world and natural space. It's nice to see those kind of themes in everything, you know, in the education system, in you know, raising children, processing through school. But because I'm an old man, I love to work with undergraduates, particularly freshmen and sophomores, because they remind me that there's a thing called spring. And part of my job is to help move them to fall, you know. And they will have forgotten about me by the time their winter comes around. You know, they'll be off in the world doing new things. But that's my strange answer to your question, Patricia, but thank you. Who else is brave enough to ask their own question?
Yeah, I had one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I've actually never really heard of African American cinema. That's why I decided to go to this art talk, because like the other ones I've kind of heard of these professions, but when I saw African American cinema, I was kind of confused because I never thought of cinema that it could be like specific to one whole race. So how would you define African American cinema and Black theater as well?
Well, I would say it's film or cinema with an African American ideal or philosophy or African center at the core of it. That I would say that African American cinema is African centered. The standard of beauty is not based on the European idea; it's based on an African one. So the love interest or the highest idea of what a person can look like is not going to look like something that came out of another space. Some of the cultural ideas, the use of music, in the use of dance and other art forms, all those things will celebrate ideas that they have Africa at the center of it, particularly the music. But that's an example. And then there's a whole long list of, there's a Pan-African festival going on right now. And those are all films made on the continent of Africa by African filmmakers. If you take a movie like Color Purple, people will call that a Black film. But is it still a Black film because Steven Spielberg made it? Does that challenge it being a Black film? Is it a Black film because all the stars or the central characters are, people of color? Look at Black Panther. Black Panther as a film was amazing. It projected ideas of beauty that went all the way to hairstyles and design elements and historical references and how women are presented. This, in traditional Hollywood theater, all the women, the ideal women are smaller if you look at Black Panther's women, except for Shuri, the sister, there were these different ideas, this really broad idea of what a woman could be and still be strong and beautiful and respected. I think those are different ways of looking at it. But it would take a dissertation to answer that entirely, but hopefully that leads you in that direction. When I've taught my African-American film classes, what I tend to do is have a sub-theme. Like we'll use only African-American films except for Birth of a Nation, and have at the core all the films be connected because of a sub-theme like love. So what does Black love look like on the film? What is it? And then talk about it historically, you know, at what point in Hollywood history, in American Hollywood history, was it okay for Black people to kiss on the screen? You know, what was that breakthrough movie and how do people respond to it? So we studied the social and cultural context behind the films in their particular era, how they reflected what was happening in society. And it becomes, I mean, I think I have to admit that I usually ruin film watching for my students in those classes because they end up, you know, unable to not respond to what they are now seeing and recognizing as a trope or a device to make something else happen for the viewer. But they appreciate it more because they're, you know, they're not being taken advantage of. You know, the thing about film is that there are so many art forms happening, you don't know you've been manipulated. I mean, there's a reason why everybody screams at the same time, you know, at the same time. And, you know, how light is used, how sound is used, how the soundtrack is used, but it's so subtle, you don't really hear it, but it's there. Everything is more than what the writer intended, but it's designed to move you in an emotional way. And if it's usually independent films move you in more of an intellectual way. Sometimes films get it right and move you in every kind of way possible. You know, I think that an ideal film should leave you exhausted emotionally because, you know, you were excited, you know, you were nervous, you were in love, you were angry and hateful, you know, all that happened inside you and you're just watching this thing passively. But if you're reading something or responding to a piece of art and nothing happens intellectually or emotionally or guttural, then to me, I think that was a wasted piece of art. Or you absolutely did not engage with it at any level at all. So for me, film is a kind of art. It's like, I think it's the highest art form because it combines so many different art disciplines. And I know one of the questions is on the list, one of the last questions, when I grow up, I want to be a filmmaker. You know, that's usually my catchphrase. Partly because when I was younger, it was too expensive to even experiment with film. Now, because of, you know, these things, I mean, the final exam for my film classes is a 10-minute film. And it involves some writing, but that writing shows up in the credits. You know, but you have to have a soundtrack, you have to have a 2-minute trailer at midterm. You have to have identifiable lighting, sound, costuming, and with a $0 budget. You can't spend any money to make this because there's editing equipment online for free. You got cameras in your phone. And it forces you to collaborate with other people. The thing about filmmaking is that even though some people give themselves like, you know, Spike Lee, written by Spike Lee, produced by Spike Lee, edited by Spike Lee. If you really pay attention to the credits, I mean, it takes an army to make a good film. Even if it's a short, you know, you want the best person who knows about lighting to be that person, you know, handling the lighting. You know, you want to start with a really good script. So the writing is important. So it's kind of collaboration that you learn, different from what you learn playing sports, different from what you learn in the business world, because you have to negotiate your artistic space. That's what I love about collaboration. So I used to run Governor School for the Arts for about 11 years. And one of my favorite days were what I call smorgasbords. And during the smorg, you know, whatever your art form was, you know, if you were a dancer or a writer or a musician, for one whole day, you studied another art form. And students loved it. And at the end of all of the smorgs, you and one other artist had to create something that was a combination of both of you, that reflected both of your talents and both of your art forms. And the work that came out of that was just amazing. But what I always found rewarding was how surprised students were, because usually if you make it to the Government School for the Arts, you've been living in a vacuum, in a tunnel. And if your thing is piano, nothing else in the world exists. But you spend a full day with a dancer and you're a piano player, and you found out that some of the language is the same when you talk about what you do, what you're inspired by. And then to collaborate with somebody else, it's really about listening. And for you all to reach something, it's about negotiation if you're doing it together. And if you're pleased with the final product and also recognize that you can't claim the whole thing, that's the kind of generosity and giving that makes you a good person for a team in filmmaking. But there's nothing in the world that prepares us to live like that. Maybe Montessori school, but everything else, especially in the West, is about finding your thing and mastering it and ignoring everything else, or believing this one thing and everything else is polarized against it. But filmmaking always gets my attention because it's it's amazing who can do it and who can't do it. I learned how to be a filmmaker, and I've only made a couple of films, but I learned how to be a good filmmaker, understand film, because I'm one of 11 children, right? Our dinner table only seated 5 people. We ate 3 meals a day. How do you do that? Cooperation, timing, coordination. How does that many people? How do you take a bath every day? How do you do laundry? If the clothesline can only hold so many. So all that stuff is negotiated and coordinated, and you figure that out. And we were, growing up, in my household was a well-oiled machine because my mother was a genius, and she made all this stuff happen, and it seemed so seamless. It seemed like an afterthought. Part of her secret was we didn't have a television in our house. But we knew what film was. We knew what music was. We listened to a lot of music. We had the radio on all the time. Even going up and down the hallway, we never bumped into each other. But when we were close, it was comfortable. And it gave us a sense of being next to people. Now I remember, I think I was in Shanghai and got on a train, and I recognized how different the personal space was in that space, that people were really crowded and close to each other. And some of my colleagues were very uncomfortable with the idea of like, oh, I feel suffocated, they're too close to me. But for me, it felt like home. It was a crowded space, but you negotiate your part of it. And there's a way of getting used to that you can move in unison through a space and not bump into people. But if you've never done that before, you hit everything. You're just walking through like you're too big. But if everybody's doing it, I imagine the same thing happened to me in Jamaica, riding in traffic and watching 2 cars come from opposite directions on what felt like a single lane road, and then wait until the last minute to go like this and go around. I'm thinking, we're gonna crash, I'm dead, but they know, and they've done it so often that it happens in the streets, in traffic. So I think, that's one of the reasons why I really think it's important as an artist to travel as much as possible and experience things that you don't find in the book. Those are the kind of experiences that become part of you, because if you listen and you pay attention, then you notice those, little tiny differences, and find a way to make it part of your art, part of who you are. Now I'm rambling. I don't even remember the question, so I'll stop there.
You answered it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Jasmine, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm keeping track of who's asked questions, so I know. David, not a word yet.
Yeah, I had one.
Okay, go ahead.
As a writer, I very much have days where it just feels like the words don't work together very well. So how do you combat those feelings of doubt and, get back to work?
You know, I think you don't make it a war. Uh, you accept that doubt is part of who you are. You know, um, my wife is brilliant, but she will worry over every single word way past when she should have already let it go because she has doubt. Um, I have a friend who's the exact opposite. He's overconfident. He needed another draft, but he didn't write it. But I think he had to find out of what your challenges are and how to use them for you and not against you. Like doubt, doubt means that you're gonna write another draft, or you're gonna ask for a second opinion, or you're gonna make sure you're always prepared, right? You're gonna give yourself enough time to complete the task. That way, those kind of actions on your part work against the thing that's a negative, that doubt, because you've not only not just let it be a negative, you've taken it as a kind of impetus or a seed to make yourself better and respond to it in a positive way instead of just worrying and biting your fingernails and pulling your hair out. You could use doubt in that way, or you could say, okay, that's my weakness. What can I do to lessen the doubt? You don't want it to ever go away. That nervousness, like my mother told me, if I ever stop being nervous about a presentation, it's time to stop doing it. That means I don't care anymore. That kind of fear of failure or the doubt that to be well received makes you put on your best effort. Or if you have an 8 o'clock event, you wouldn't stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning partying if the thing at 8 o'clock is important to you. So it shapes your priorities. I mean, all those things that make you a better person and a better artist and a better writer in your case, you could claim and really make you a better person and artist because you had doubt, but you didn't use it. You didn't let it be this thing that crushed you or limited you. You let it be a thing that you use as seed to be better. And I think that can apply to a lot of things, I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I still have doubt. But I think that, when I get to the point where I have no doubt that this is going to be the best book ever, and it's going to win everything, or this piece of art is going to be so good that people are going to fight over it and that there'll be a bidding war, or this play will keep selling out forever. I hope somebody will just snatch me off the stage, that's because that's approaching arrogance, I don't want to ever be that proud of my work that it comes off as arrogance. A little doubt is good for you if you use it as medicine, right? Not as poison. Often it's the same thing, medicine or poison, depending on how you use it. It could kill you or it can make you better. Next. We're halfway there if you keep in time.
So with the works you've created so far, like how do you get ideas for what you've done, especially when you were first establishing yourself as a writer? Like, were you taking inspiration from daily life? Like, were you taking inspiration from the news? Where did you kind of get the ideas for some of the things that you created?
That's never something I ever worried about. I think there are probably 1,000 poems that need to be written every day. As a poet, I only have to write one. And if I don't write one today, I'm not going to lose my job, So I can mess it up 10 times, but I can't go for a whole year and not write a good poem. I have to give myself time to do so. I mean, I think the ideas come from just being alive. I think I mentioned earlier the importance of listening and listening with your whole body, traveling to a place and and being invisible in that space, walking through a room and listening to how people talk to each other. Because at some point as a writer, imagine you're a fiction writer and you have to create a scene where an 80-year-old is giving advice to a 6-year-old. But when people hear it, it sounds like two college undergrads talking to each other. Whose mistake is that? That's the writer's mistake. But maybe the writer has never heard a 6-year-old talk to an 80-year-old man. That's a fault of imagination. But you have to have something that allows you to at least simulate the thing that's more important than truth when you're making art. And that's authenticity, right? Especially in film. It doesn't have to be Abraham Lincoln, especially since he's dead, but we need to believe that that's Abe Lincoln in this moment. That's Abe Lincoln, which is a lie, right? Because it's not Abe Lincoln, but for the space of this film and this movie and this moment and this assassination, we need to believe. So your job is about authenticity, not necessarily the truth. And even the truth is debatable and defined differently depending on what you believe and where you're from and what you've experienced. I think that take a coin. Most people believe like a coin, there's two sides to every story, right? My mother was quick to, let me know that was not true. That, the first thing she said was a coin has an edge, so that's 3 sides. So that's a poor excuse to compare it to. Then she said, but there's 2 sides to every story, and then there's the truth. And the truth is a sum total of everybody's point of view. Everybody who saw it and experienced it, they saw it through their own personal lens. So if you look at a story from one person's point of view, you get kind of a slanted, a spun, incomplete story, but sometimes that gets passed on as history. I'll give you an example. There's this notion in Hollywood, Hollywood uses a lot of stereotypes. And for a long time, Westerns were really huge. They were the most well-attended, best sold, #1 movies coming out of Hollywood for a long time. But there was this notion in Hollywood that Native Americans, or Indians as they were called then, were horse thieves. And I went to a lecture in St. Louis and heard a Native American scholar talk about where that ideal came from. And he tied it all the way to the Lewis and Clark expedition. And so I was like trying to get all these notes down. But he talked about how the Lewis and Clark journals referenced the Teton Sioux as the worst miscreants on the face of the earth and horse thieves. There were 5 men who wrote journals that were part of the expedition. You may have learned that it was Lewis and Clark, but there were 42 people that were part of the expedition, including a Native American 15-year-old young woman with a 3-month-old baby, and an African-American manservant who they picked up in Kentucky, in Louisville, in fact. That almost always gets left out of the story when you're talking about Lewis and Clark, right? But those journals, those 5 men wrote, if you turn to the first mention of horses in the journals, they all say exactly the same thing, word for word, all the way down the page, as if they sat around the fire and said, this is what we're going to say about the Teton Sioux. Worst miscreants on the face of the earth, everybody. Horse thieves. Then he pulled up the manifest that they had when the expedition began. And it was a list of everything, every food, every barrel of gunpowder, every item they took along with them on the journey. And nowhere on the manifest was anything that even looked like the word horse, because they didn't have any. They made most of their journey in these canoes and boats and traveled mostly by water all the way there. But when they got to to the Rocky Mountains, they had to cross them, and they had all these supplies to carry. They needed at least 40 horses to carry all those supplies over the mountains. So if you look in those journals, there are things that say something like, I'm paraphrasing, found 12 great strong horses today, some with markings, all alone in the field. Next day, found 10 more horses today. They kept finding horses. They found over 40 horses. Some of them were marked and belonged to the Teton Sioux. Well, the Teton Sioux found their horses back. But in those books, it was the Lewis and Clark party telling the story, not the Teton Sioux. So they said they're horse thieves. Everybody agreed they're horse thieves. And so this idea leaked into literature, and when films were first being made, especially the silent films, they had these, very ugly negative stereotypes and caricatures about Native Americans that included Native Americans as horse thieves. And so he could trace that all the way back through the literature. This thing that happens on film came from the literature, came from an experience that was not true, but it was considered history. It was just one person's point of view. That's a long anecdote to explain something that I already forgot about. What else you got? 15 minutes left, and you'll be free from this hostage situation.
I'd ask, I don't know, what do you get from what you do, just what do you think is what you get the most value out of? Like, what do you enjoy the most, or you feel is just like, this is the thing when you get out of bed in the morning and you like go to journal or something, like, this is what I'm going to get out of the day, or this is what I feel I'm contributing today?
It's a hard thing to assess the first thing in the morning. My father's response when you would say, good morning, he would say, is it? What's so good about it? It's not even over yet. How do you know it's a good morning? So I have to say, good morning so far, Dad. And I tend to say, I've kind of morphed that by saying, when people say, how are you doing? I said, ask me at the end of the day. Then I can give you a more honest answer. I don't know how I'm doing because a plane could fall in 2 seconds and like crash into my car. Things happen all the time. So it's too early to tell. But for me, if I even dare to think about what I would consider successful use of my time or hope, usually has to do with my family. I've got a 2-year-old. I also have a 38-year-old. I'm an old man. I started early, then I started again. But I'm really invested in my youngest son because, I think I got 25 years left. I at least want to catch him graduating from high school and maybe doing something in the world. So I try to take care of myself and live as healthily as possible so that I make at least that deadline, that finish line. So if there's a day where he acknowledges that he understands something he didn't understand the day before, and he's very, very stubborn, so we pay attention to his language, to how he's using it. This week he learned the difference between forward and reverse. He has a little motorized car, and we can now say, back it up or put it in reverse and pull the gear. But I can't get him to hold the steering wheel the whole time, so he's driving with his hands down. Like, who's even watching drive like this? He's in the back seat, trying to watch everything. And he's been, as he's picked up more words, he's starting to become that backseat driver. Like he yells out things like, red light, red means stop, so. But then I'll say, well, tell me when it's time to go. And the light will turn green and he's just sitting there going, so I have to pull off. So, he's not all there yet, but as he gets closer, it's very rewarding to me. I'm very excited about that. On the other end, I have my older kids are all overachievers and decided not to go into the arts. They're very, like my daughter works for Apple. My son has a degree in mechanical engineering and a second degree in industrial design. And they talk about computers all the time. When the three of us are together, I have to ask them to use regular people language, act like you're talking to a poet, and then they'll dumb it down for me to tell me what they're talking about. So this week's conversation has been about Bitcoins. And I won't even begin to tell you, how much they've laughed at me for even the questions I ask about Bitcoins, because to them it's like, walking down the street is such a simple thing, simple idea. But to me, it's crazy, But so that I think the whole learning thing, I really love learning. I think, if you can be a lifelong learner, that's a good life, If you have a chance to travel as part of that good life, if you have a chance to have as much art as possible, that's a high quality of life. Forget being poor or rich, but a life full of art and travel and laughter, that's a good life, But if you have a chance to invest in somebody, either as a teacher-student relationship or children, to watch them develop, to me, is the most rewarding thing in the world. Everything that happens as an artist and a writer is just secondary. It feels good to finish a book project. It feels good to execute a painting. It feels good to be at opening night of a play when it happens. But I know much of that is work. It's not, I wish it was easy. I wish I enjoyed the entire process, but, you got to beat that clay, until it's so pliable that you can actually think about it becoming a piece of art. But in the beginning, it's like this big, rough, heavy thing. And I think all art is like at the beginning, that you struggle with it. But for me, it just develops muscles. That repetition develops more skill, and it gives you time to think. And I think that's the thing about being a young artist is, don't let anybody say, pigeonhole you into being one thing. Claim artist and everything it means. Don't let people tell you that you're a poet. You're our poet. You're our writer when you can do other things. At Governor School, a lot of kids, were visual artists, but who blew up the coffee houses and the open mics with other art stuff. And it was so rewarding to their friends to see that, isn't that the dancer up there singing? Like, I didn't know he could do that. That kind of joy that comes from such a simple discovery about other people that you thought you knew that, or knowing that you could share this thing and there's no weight on it being excellent because, excellence is what you do when you're dancing. So this is just me sharing something I enjoy. So that's kind of search for joy and how you deal with pain. Really, the other good thing about the arts is that, that's when you figure out that the world really needs us after some big painful experience. I was in New York after 9/11, and we were there shooting footage for a film. But there was art all over the city. These they didn't call them art, they call them makeshift, shrines, even, there was a church where people were putting up signs and ribbons and hanging T-shirts. But if you step back from it, it was a collage. And it was beautiful just to look at. Those places where people are just burning candles and putting up pictures of people who were missing. They became more like a church. But when you looked at like a month worth of candle wax and what they had done on top of each other, it was an art piece, a public art sculpture. So you can find art everywhere if you're open to it. What was the question? I have no idea. But it doesn't matter if I've held your attention for 50 minutes almost. Another question or two?
I was gonna ask, because you talked a lot about different types of art forms and like understanding that there's different types just in other than the one you say that like you specialize in. So if you were to choose an art form to practice for a day or like a month or something, what other art form other than writing or film would you choose?
Well, I knew it would, if I only had a day, it would not be anything connected to music. I know that takes discipline and talent and time. For a day, I would like to spend a day because I want to see the finished product at the end. It would be visual art for sure. Maybe some landscape architecture, because this time of year I want to be outdoors. I would love to be given, I don't know if this may be too old for you, but Edward Scissorhands. I have relatives who, if I visit in the summer, they would throw a pair of shears at me and beg me to like chop up their bush. And then they make requests like, can you make it spell something? Can you, or make it circular? And it's, I've gotten real joy out of that. Maybe be involved in painting a large scale mural, if I only had a day and I had a team of people helping. But yeah, something that you could see the final product at the end. And then if that was Monday, then Tuesday, it could be something else. But the thing about the arts is that there are very few things that you could just, if it's not somehow related to another art form that you're good at, like I wouldn't play a violin for a day. I haven't played any string instrument ever. And it would be an exercise in torture for me. And I have my poetry voice is okay, but I know I can't sing because all of my sisters have told me so. So I wouldn't even waste time at unless it was, some kind of family night, game night, and there was a microphone on stage and I'm up there with 3 other people. I won't even pretend to sing because I know my limits, unless it's for humor, and in that case, I know it'd be a great gag for them to hear me try to sing and pretend to be serious, which is even funner to them. That's how cruel my siblings are. But I think it had to be something that at the end of the day, I was exhausted and it was fun, that I enjoyed the entire time. Maybe being in a barbershop and taking these amazing afros and carving them down and writing names and heads, and I would do that. That's too personal. Large scale mural or some landscape architecture. One last question. Who wants it? Elizabeth, what did we miss from that long, important list? Is there anything that they're going to get quizzed on or in trouble for not knowing?
I don't think so. You sort of answered everything just in not like a linear fashion. But if you don't mind, I'll ask a question just for me, because theater is what I'm interested in. So I wanted to know like what, I guess, sort of like drew you to theater, but also like what are you excited about in today's theater? Because I feel like there's a lot going on, but like what do you see that you really just love?
Well, I miss theater because of COVID. I really love how you could get lost in the audience. Fences, Denzel Washington's August Wilson production, got a lot of nominations and won, I think a couple of Oscars maybe 2 years ago. But what I loved about that film was how much they tried to make it look like theater. I've seen enough productions of Fences to know that, that's what they were doing with the camera angles. And to me, it felt like watching this thing in the round as much as possible. But what I'm liking about theater is how close to film it's becoming, and vice versa. Technology has changed everything, and now you could drop in an image that's just something on film that changes the whole scene and background. I've been working on this one-man, 2-act play about El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. And you might not recognize that name, but that was his name, and that's the name on his headstone, but most people know him as Malcolm X. He was born Malcolm Little. But people kind of froze him in time, and they limit him to his political self and time period in his life. But I prefer to think about him as a father. He had, a set of twins and all these girls that that he helped make, and I met and spent some time with his widow when she was still living, and she talked about him as a father and a minister and her husband, and the person she described was never anybody I saw on film or in a textbook or ever read about. It was a brand new person. So I wanted to write this play called Malcolm and Betty that did kind of a reverse Superman thing. How Clark Kent takes off his glasses and now he's Superman. Malcolm wore glasses. I wanted to have Malcolm walk to the edge of the set, take off his glasses, and become husband, father. Nothing political in that space, but it's really about this kind of intimate relationship that was about family. And then when he walked to the edge of the space, he put the glasses on and then become Malcolm again. Almost change his posture, and you see it happening like it's this kind of metamorphosis just with clothing and lighting. But I've been in love with that idea for about 5 years. I haven't finished the play yet because I'm trying to do too many things, but I love the idea of it. And I would love to introduce people to that person because most people have never seen that person. And only his wife and the kids know that person. And I felt like I had an advantage because, she was holding my daughter on her lap. She was about 5 at the time. She fell asleep in her arms, and she's talking about her husband. She's describing a man that, I could see in her description. I could feel the love. You could almost understand the energy in their relationship. She was pregnant when he passed away, and you could hear the pain in her voice just from that loss. And I would love to have to take the opportunity to recreate what she gave us that night in that small, short, intimate space. We'd love to create that in a holistic way so that other people could experience that from the stage, and maybe even on screen, but it's just something that I think nobody even knows about and hasn't seen yet. So I feel guilty not having finished it yet. That's my dumb answer. Last chance. Questions? Thank all of you who were brave enough to ask questions. Especially Joy, who went first. And Elizabeth, who manages a really well-run machine here. And Emily, who's back there feeding kids or making dinner or something. I'm about to go join, my better half and do the same thing. But you guys, I don't have to tell you how fortunate you are to be in this LLC. If I were your age and doing this all over again, I'd want to be where you are right now. I mean, what a gift. And I know you won't waste it. College is the only time in the world where you have permission to make mistakes, right? You get to do things that other people would go to jail for, but you're a college student, you can test your boundaries, not commit crimes, but try the things you've never done before. This is kind of a really rich opportunity that really will shape the rest of your lives. So make some great art, meet some great people, make some real friends. My best friends today are people I met in college. And I met 1,000 people in college, at least, but I got 3 great friends out of it. Been there for thick and thin forever, it seems like now. But you know who they are when you meet them, and hang on to them. Use empathy. Make great art. Read poetry. Watch a good movie. All right, I'm gonna go watch some bad TV. Liz will be good here.
I think so. Thank you so much for this. It's been wonderful.
All right, hope I didn't bore you too
Thank
much.
you so much.
Bye, Jasmine.
Goodbye.
I better see you in my film class in, I don't know, a year.
I can make that.
Okay. All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Bye, guys.